Labor MP Peter Khalil joins us now. We might just pick up there, Peter Khalil, where we left off with Tom Petrosky and the escalating trade war. How concerned are you about this, given that it's gone beyond China? We see two South American countries no longer exempt from tariffs. Australia has just has escaped them once again. What do you put that down to?
Well, a couple of parts. Good morning, first of all, Pete and Laura. I'm very concerned. We're all very concerned. Obviously, Australia is a trading nation, and it's in our best interest and in our national interest for the US and China, particularly to end that trade war. But more particularly, as you pointed out, for this not to spread beyond the contest, if you like, the trade contest between the US and China, to further diminish the rules-based order around trade. Where it becomes about the US trying to strike the best deal with, bilaterally with other countries, and then getting into various, putting up tariffs and all the rest of it. That starts to break down the system, a system which has worked and works very well for us as a middle power, as a trading nation, with 90% of our exports and imports going through the region and so on. So this is of great concern. Now, the other point I would make about it is President Trump obviously has domestic considerations, and this comment that we just heard about the potential for this not being resolved until after the US federal election is also concerning, but kind of makes sense if you look at the domestic situation. If he does strike a deal, he's going to have to concede a fair bit to China, and that might not work very well with what he's promised, particularly to his base.
We're just looking at pictures that have just come into our newsroom of Donald Trump and Melania Trump at the moment, Peter. They're at 10 Downing Street, walking in there to no doubt go and have some conversations with the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, standing before the cameras, flashes going off, everything else. But just on Donald Trump, there's a stoush that's going on, Peter, at the moment between him and the French President, Emmanuel Macron. It's over NATO. Donald Trump falling in behind NATO. He's been critical of them in the past. Heads on a swivel here, hard to keep up sometimes. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, that's right. I mean, it's like a yo-yo, isn't it? Like you would recall about 6 months ago, there was a big story about President Trump being very critical of NATO and questioning its future. And now it seems to be the reverse position. There is a significant turning point now at its 70th anniversary, NATO's 70th anniversary, these meetings obviously in London for NATO, and you've got big question marks around the viability of this Euro-Atlantic or transatlantic security alliance, which has served Europe and the US very, very well post-World War II, obviously. But it's really fraying at the edges with, the Turkey, which is a member of NATO, and its operations in northern Syria, now being called into question even by President Macron, one of the major states within NATO. So it is a really disturbing time, I think, for geostrategic stability when NATO is being questioned in this way. But it's kind of good, I guess, that the President is now defending NATO, which is a bit of a change from some of the... Well, to be fair, the pressure he was putting on a while back was really about NATO member states putting more resources into military spending and trying to get them to do more, which by the way, was something that many former US presidents also pushed, but probably more privately.
You wouldn't have missed this across the front page of almost every newspaper this morning. Peter Khalil, is Australia's education standards slipping compared to the rest of the world in science, in maths, in literature, for all 15-year-olds. Yeah. How concerning is this for you?
I caught up with Bob Hawke before he passed away, and we talked about a lot of the great achievements he had in his prime ministership, and I said to him, I asked him, what's the one thing that not many people talk about that you're most proud of, Bob? And he said, well, when I started as prime minister, only 30% of kids graduated from high school, and based on policies that our government put in place, it got to 80% by the time I finished my time as prime minister, and he was most proud of that. And I said, you know what, Bob, I was one of those kids. I graduated from high school in 1990, and I got a future based on those policies. I got access to a good education, and unlike first-generation migrants, I didn't have to go and do factory work. I had more opportunities. And education is really, it is the key to that opens the door to opportunity. And so these results are just shocking. I mean, we're talking about, to stretch the metaphor a bit, but the keys aren't working now. Like, we're really below average in reading, writing, math, science. If we've failed on all of that, that's a big F.
Is this a failure of Gonski, though?
Really, well, I mean, I'm really interested to see what, when you interview the Education Minister, what his answer is going to be. What is this government going to do? What actions are they going to take?
Was it more money?
Because they've had 6 years. It's on their watch. Well, there's been increases in spending, okay, over the period of this time in various states and territories. It can't just be about money, although that's an important element.
Well, I noted that the Victorian... Is Labor still promising to spend $17 billion more then?
Well, we're going through all of our policies, Laura. I like that trick question that you try at 6:40 in the morning. But we're going through all of that, and we'll obviously make the announcements about education spending and what that quantum will be closer to the election. But what I'm saying, I think, is a substantive point. You've got to look at the curriculums. You've got to look at the substance. You've got to look at the way things are implemented. Obviously, funding is a big part of that and how the funding is implemented. So I'm curious to see what the government says. It's been a big F on their watch. I know that the Victorian State Education Minister, James Merlino, has said that there needs to be a look at the maths curriculum, and that he also made the point that you've got a lot of teachers who are off-field teaching maths, for example, and that could be one of the problems that we're facing. Sorry?
Maybe it's payment for teachers too, Matt, I have no idea what the answer is here, but because you've got, like you said, there's more funding that's gone into education, but we're going backwards. We're now 3 years behind China and Singapore. It's a long way.
It is, and we are going to be caught out in the second half of the 21st century if we can't keep up on the most basic of things to be a smart nation. That's something that we've prided ourselves on, particularly because we're a smaller nation by population. This is critically important for us to get right. It could be, you're right too, Pete, teachers are probably the most important profession in our society, and they get paid not very well.
Yep. Well, it's interesting to hear you say, Peter Khalil, that it's not all about money. I don't think some of your colleagues agree with that, but as you say, everything's under review, right?
That's right.
Okay, Peter Khalil.
Good morning. Good morning, Pete. Yeah.
I appreciate your time.